Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Flight 472 from New York to Los Angeles was nearly full, but in first class, the atmosphere was tranquil, almost luxurious. Passengers seemed absorbed in their screens, some were leafing through newspapers, others sleeping peacefully. Among them, Amelia Carter, an elegant black woman in her 40s, was working on her laptop, focused, calm, radiating serenity and confidence. Across the aisle, Jonathan Whitmore, a 50-year-old influential but arrogant businessman, sipped his coffee and flicked through a financial magazine. His eyes fell on Amelia and a shiver of disdain ran down his spine. What is she doing here, he thought, convinced that she didn't deserve her first-class seat. Jonathan stood up, adjusted his jacket, and approached Amelia, a tight smile on his face. "Excuse me, madam," he began, his tone intended to be polite, but already betraying his irritation. "This seat is reserved for premium passengers. You should sit somewhere else." Amelia looked up, calmly placed her hands on the keyboard, and replied in a soft but firm voice. "Sir, I paid for this seat. This is my place." A silence fell. Jonathan, stunned by the stillness he couldn't break, felt his pride bruised. He shook his head, unable to accept being resisted like this. "I advise you to," he began, but the words died in his throat because Amelia was looking straight into his eyes, without fear, without aggression, just with a quiet determination that made him uncomfortable. The passengers began to notice the tension. Some cast worried glances, others discreetly took out their phones. Jonathan felt all eyes on him. And for the first time in a long time, the man accustomed to imposing his will felt that he was no longer in control of the situation. The flight had barely begun, but already Jonathan Whitmore was about to learn that arrogance and prejudice could lead to unexpected humiliations, and sometimes, even more unexpected revelations. Jonathan Whitmore could no longer contain his frustration. He sat up straight in his seat, his face flushed, and took a deep breath before addressing Amelia Carter a second time. "Listen to me carefully, madam," he said, trying to keep his tone authoritative but trembling slightly. "You must understand that these seats are not for everyone. There are rules, and you. Amelia looked up from her computer and met his gaze, calm and confident. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand your concerns, but I paid for this seat. I have all the necessary documents. This is my seat." The words were simple, polite, but each syllable carried a heavy weight of firmness. Jonathan felt his blood boil. He was used to people yielding to his authority, not being stood up to with such calmness. The flight attendants, alerted by Jonathan's whispers and tone, approached quietly. Emily Harper, the head hostess, tried to defuse the situation. "Mr. Whitmore, we'll check the reservation. Please remain calm." Jonathan looked up at her, visibly irritated. "I'm calm, miss. I'm just enforcing the rules." Yet his voice betrayed his anger. Around them, several passengers watched the scene. Some took out their phones, curious to film the confrontation, others whispered among themselves. The atmosphere in the cabin was changing, the elegant calm of first class was transforming into palpable tension. Amelia, however, didn't move. She closed her laptop slightly and placed her hands on her knees, a barely perceptible smile on her face. "If you want to check my reservation, go ahead. I have nothing to hide." Jonathan felt his pride crack. Every second of Amelia's calm was like a silent challenge he didn't know how to meet. He tried to raise his voice, but the sound of his own voice suddenly seemed ridiculous. The murmurs of the passengers around him only added to his discomfort. Little did he know that this brief moment of confrontation was only the beginning of a journey that would bring him face to face with his own arrogance, and a revelation he never imagined. The flight continued, but the tension between Jonathan and Amelia now filled the entire first class. Jonathan, unable to cope with Amelia's impassive attitude, was seething inwardly. He nervously tapped his newspaper on the seat and glanced around furiously, searching for allies among the passengers. Amelia, for her part, continued working on her laptop. Each keystroke was methodical, punctuated by an almost hypnotic calm. She didn't look at Jonathan, didn't respond to his hostile stares, but each of her gestures seemed to silently affirm, "I will not give in." Jonathan, frustrated by this relentless silence, tried to raise his voice. "Don't you understand? It's not just about money." Amelia finally looked up at him, staring at him with a calm that unsettled him. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand your arguments, but it doesn't change anything. I paid for this seat. It's legal and correct." The contrast between her serenity and Jonathan's visible anger was stark. Every word Amelia spoke was a mirror of her patience in the face of his arrogance. The passengers around them were captivated, some exchanging incredulous glances. Emily Harper, the head hostess, walked past Jonathan again. "Mr. Whitmore, I remind you that we must remain calm for the safety of all passengers." "I'm calm," Jonathan replied, but his tone betrayed the exact opposite. Amelia, on the other hand, didn't move an inch. Her calm seemed almost unreal, and with each passing minute, Jonathan's tension increased. His face tightened further, and his hands, which he thought he was resting confidently on the back of the seat, were trembling slightly. At that precise moment, Jonathan realized something he had never experienced before: his authority, his social position, and his money were no match for the quiet dignity of a determined and self-assured woman. And this realization, though subtle at first, was beginning to eat away at him from the inside. The flight wasn't even halfway through, but Jonathan already sensed that this confrontation would mark the beginning of a humiliation he'd never anticipated. And Amelia, without even raising her voice, had taken control of the situation. The murmur of the first-class passengers grew louder and louder. Some discreetly took out their phones to film the scene, while others exchanged worried or disapproving glances. Jonathan's every move was being observed, analyzed, and judged. Jonathan felt everyone's eyes on him. His pride was turning into pure frustration. He raised his hands, as if to show he was in the right, but every movement seemed to accentuate his ridiculousness. A passenger sitting near the window whispered to her neighbor, "Is he serious? Does he really think he can make her move?" Jonathan, hearing these whispers, felt his anger rise even more. He tried to raise his voice. "You don't realize who you're talking to." Amelia, without raising her voice, answered calmly, "Mr. Whitmore, I understand perfectly. And I'm staying here because I paid for this seat." The contrast was striking: Jonathan, flushed with anger and trembling inside; Amelia, calm, collected, in complete control of the situation. Every word she spoke was like a silent reminder of her helplessness. Emily Harper, the head hostess, approached once again to try to calm Jonathan down. "Mr. Whitmore, I ask that you remain seated and respect our passenger. Any disruption could result in sanctions." Jonathan leaned towards her, furious. "But, don't you see that it's absurd?" Emily crossed her arms and looked at him firmly. "No, Mr. Whitmore. You're the one disrupting the flight." Around them, some passengers began to whisper among themselves about Jonathan's arrogance and Amelia's impressive calm. An electric tension hung in the air. Jonathan felt himself losing control not only over the situation, but also over other people's perception of him. With each passing minute, her frustration grew almost unbearable. Yet Amelia didn't flinch. She continued to type on her computer, unperturbed, as if the whole world could collapse around her and it wouldn't matter. Jonathan slowly realized that this confrontation wasn't just an affront to his ego, it exposed his own weakness and arrogance. And worst of all, he thought, he was powerless against this woman he wrongly considered inferior. As the flight progressed, the tension between Jonathan Whitmore and Amelia Carter reached a fever pitch. Jonathan, flushed with anger and unable to understand why Amelia wasn't giving in, felt his patience slipping away. He stood up abruptly, attracting the attention of all the passengers. "Sit down," he shouted, his voice intended to be authoritative but betraying his inner turmoil. "You don't realize who you're talking to." Amelia looked up calmly, never taking her eyes off the screen for more than a few seconds. Her voice remained calm, but each word resonated with force. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm listening. But I remind you that this seat legally belongs to me. Your anger changes nothing. The entire cabin held its breath. The murmurs grew louder, passengers exchanging surprised glances, some surreptitiously taking videos with their phones. Jonathan felt shame beginning to creep into his pride, but he refused to admit it. He pointed an accusing finger at Amelia. You dare challenge me? You think you can humiliate me? Amelia, impassive, looked up and replied. I'm not trying to humiliate you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm just trying to be respected, like any other passenger here. At that moment, Jonathan felt an uncontrollable anger rising within him. Every glance from a passenger seemed to judge him, every whisper amplified his humiliation. He stammered out confused arguments about respect and rules, but none seemed coherent. Amelia, for her part, didn't bat an eyelid. She represented absolute calm, and that calm made Jonathan even more furious. Emily Harper, the head hostess, stepped forward once more, this time with a firmness he couldn't ignore. Mr. Whitmore, I order you to remain seated. Any further disturbances will be reported to the authorities. Jonathan, unable to contain his fury, growled. You're all against me. Amelia, without any animosity, replied. I'm not against you. I'm just staying in my place. That simple word, stay in my place, echoed through Jonathan's mind like a clap of thunder. For the first time, he felt that his arrogance, his sense of superiority, and his prejudice had failed. He was confronted with a truth he had never considered: his power and influence had no hold over Amelia Carter. The confrontation was now complete. Jonathan Whitmore, a man accustomed to imposing his will everywhere, was reduced to a state of frustration and helplessness in the face of a calm and determined woman, in the almost total silence of the cabin, who watched him with fascination. The tension in the cabin only grew. Jonathan Whitmore, still standing, felt his hands tremble slightly as he tried to maintain an appearance of authority. Every passenger was now openly looking at him, some with astonishment, others with disapproval. The phones continued to film, capturing every moment of his arrogant behavior. Emily Harper, the head hostess, approached him with a mixture of firmness and professionalism. Mr. Whitmore, for the safety of all passengers, I ask that you be seated immediately. Any further disruption will result in penalties. Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to mask his anger and embarrassment. But I'm just enforcing the rules. Emily looked him straight in the eye, unperturbed. No, Mr. Whitmore. You're disrupting the flight. Amelia, sitting quietly, barely raised her eyes, as if to say, this is my seat, my right, and your anger changes nothing. His impassive calm accentuated the shadow of shame that was beginning to envelop Jonathan. Every passenger in the cabin now clearly perceived who was right. A few murmurs crossed the class. Amazing. He's ridiculous. What patience she has. Jonathan felt his pride erode under the silent, accusing stares of the assembly. He wanted to shout, to argue, to prove his superiority, but no words found their place. Amelia didn't react, gave no opening. Her silence was a more powerful weapon than any insult Jonathan had ever uttered. He finally sat down, his shoulders tense, feeling the weight of his failure. In his mind, he knew he had just lost something far more important than control of the situation: his image, his pride, his ego. He understood then that against someone like Amelia Carter, the power of arrogance meant nothing. And yet, he didn't yet know that the real humiliation, the one that would mark him forever, awaited him after landing. The plane began its descent toward Los Angeles. The tension in the first-class cabin was still palpable, but Jonathan Whitmore had resigned himself to remaining seated, his face set and his gaze shifty. Amelia Carter's every movement was watched with growing frustration. She calmly put away her laptop, arranged her bag, and checked her flight documents, still calm, still unperturbed. Jonathan, unable to tear his eyes away from her, felt a pang of doubt creep into his mind. He wondered for the first time, who is this woman really? How can she remain so calm in the face of my authority? The plane finally touched the tarmac. Passengers began to stand, gathering their belongings, eager to leave the flight. Amelia stood up as well, unhurriedly, and adjusted her coat elegantly. Jonathan felt a strange stirring in his chest. He couldn't help but follow her every move. As he stepped off the plane onto the tarmac, Jonathan saw something that froze him. A crowd of photographers and journalists were gathered near the jetway, their cameras poised to capture someone's arrival. Jonathan's heart sank. He thought the attention was for him, a sign of recognition of his importance, but when Amelia appeared at the exit, all the cameras turned toward her. The journalists greeted her with applause and smiles, holding out microphones and cameras. Photographers took pictures of her from every angle. Jonathan, speechless, felt his world collapse. The woman he had tried to humiliate was not just an ordinary passenger. Every step Amelia took on the tarmac was a cruel reminder to Jonathan. His arrogance, prejudice, and selfishness had just collided with a reality he'd never imagined. And the worst part, he thought with a mixture of shame and anger, was that he had no excuse, and no way to repair his reputation in the face of this stark truth. Jonathan Whitmore stood there, unable to look away. The crowd of reporters and photographers surrounding Amelia Carter was overwhelming, and all the camera flashes seemed to be focused on him alone, but on the person he had tried to humiliate. As he tried to understand, a journalist came forward with a microphone and said, "Ms. Carter, congratulations on your recent aviation initiative and your equal opportunity programs. How do you feel about this success?" Amelia, with the same serenity that had infuriated Jonathan on the plane, replied, "I am honored. Our work is about opening doors and creating opportunities for everyone, regardless of background or social status. That's what motivates me every day." Jonathan felt a mixture of confusion and panic wash over him. The woman he had humiliated wasn't just rich and influential, she was owner of a major airline, a respected media figure and philanthropist. Everything he had tried to denigrate on the plane had never existed. His supposed inferiority was an illusion constructed by his prejudice. The passengers who had filmed him on the plane had now shared the videos on social media. Jonathan looked at his phone. The footage of his anger, arrogance, and attempts to humiliate Amelia was already circulating everywhere. Hundreds of comments denounced his behavior, some praising Amelia's patience and dignity. Every camera flash, every reporter's voice, every comment on his phone was like a hammer hitting his pride. He realized then, painfully, that his attempt at humiliation had completely failed, and had backfired. Jonathan felt a mixture of bitterness and shame rise within him. For the first time in a long time, he felt powerless. The woman he had believed inferior had just shown him, without a single aggressive word, the power of dignity, calm, and success. The shock was complete. Jonathan Whitmore had just realized that his prejudices and arrogance had led him to humiliate himself in front of the entire world, and that true power lay not in money or status, but in self-control and respect for others. The next morning, Jonathan Whitmore sat down in his office with a shaky cup of coffee. His computer screen already displayed headlines from major newspapers and notifications from his social media accounts. His heart sank as he scanned the articles. Amelia Carter, a pioneer in aviation and equal opportunity. First class, how Amelia Carter inspires the world. An arrogant passenger humiliated in front of an exceptional woman. Jonathan blinked, unable to believe what he was reading. Images of his confrontation on the plane circulated everywhere, his angry face, his stiff posture, his authoritarian gestures, and Amelia Carter's impeccable patience, impassive, calm, and in control of the situation. Colleagues and friends began calling him, some to criticize his behavior, others to ask what had happened on the plane. Jonathan stammered out some explanations, but no words seemed enough to allay the scandal. On social media, videos of the scene went viral. Internet users praised Amelia's dignity and calm, denouncing Jonathan's arrogance and implicit racism. He watched the comments with a growing sense of shame. What a lesson in humility. Bravo to this woman for her incredible patience. Next time, think before you judge someone by their appearance. Jonathan realized then that the whole world was now seeing the scene exactly as it had happened, and that his image, his reputation, and his ego had just suffered an irreversible blow. Every word, every gesture he had made to intimidate Amelia had been recorded and shared, rendering him vulnerable and ridiculous. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Whitmore felt a deep fear, that of losing the respect of those around him and of finally realizing that his pride and prejudice had been his worst enemies. Sitting alone in his office, Jonathan Whitmore watched the notifications pile up on his phone. Each new comment, each new video shared on social media, rekindled a mixture of shame and anger at himself. He finally realized that his attempt at humiliation had not only failed, it had been turned against him, exposing his arrogance and prejudices for all to see. Images of his angry red face on the plane, his authoritarian gestures and his harsh words were circulating everywhere. People judged him harshly, and for the first time in years, he felt small and helpless. Jonathan recalled every moment on the plane, Amelia's unwavering calm, her dignity, her patience. Every second of his arrogance had been rendered futile by the quiet strength of this woman he had wanted to demean. He understood that his perception of superiority had been completely false. A mixture of anger, shame, and regret washed over him. He wondered how he could have been so blinded by his ego, his money, and his social status, as to treat a worthy and respected person as inferior. He realized that his true humiliation was not the one he had inflicted on Amelia, but the one he was inflicting on himself through his behavior. Jonathan also understood that, despite his internal apologies and feelings of regret, there was no way to erase the scene. The whole world had seen it, and he now had to live with this cruel lesson. For the first time, he felt vulnerable, forced to reflect on his prejudices and how he judged others. The power and money he had long considered superior could do nothing against the dignity, patience and courage of Amelia Carter. And that morning, Jonathan Whitmore understood that some lessons, though painful, are inevitable and memorable. Jonathan Whitmore sat for a long time, immersed in a heavy silence. His office, once a place of control and power, now felt stifling. Images and videos of his arrogance on the plane replayed in his mind, and he realized that his reputation had been permanently damaged. Amelia Carter, for her part, continued on her path with elegance and serenity. In the media, she was celebrated for her success, her vision, and her commitment to equal opportunity in aviation. Her dignity and patience had transformed what could have been a humiliation into a silent triumph, an inspiring example for thousands of people. Jonathan realized he had learned, the hard way, a vital truth: real power is not measured by money or social status, but to the ability to remain in control of oneself, to dignity in the face of provocation, and to respect others. His attempt to dominate and humiliate had been a failure, but it had taught him the value of humility and the quiet strength of those he believed to be inferior. For several days, Jonathan reflected on this experience. Every time he saw a new video or article about Amelia, he felt the bitterness of his mistake, but also a deep respect for this woman he had underestimated. Eventually, he realized that some lessons can only be taught through direct experience, and that humility is often the most difficult but most powerful path to true wisdom. Amelia, without ever responding to his anger or arrogance, had left Jonathan alone with himself, and that silence was more instructive than any confrontation. In the calm of her quiet victory, she had shown that true strength lies in self-control, dignity, and respect for others. Jonathan Whitmore, for the first time, felt the need to change, not to be admired, but to never again be guided by pride and prejudice. And this realization, though belated, marked the beginning of a transformation he would never forget.